when people call us, they're nervous and stressed out about Medicare. They're especially afraid of making a mistake. They don't want to have any late fees or penalties or miss important enrollment windows. This is especially true for those people we talk to who want to continue to work past age 65. Hi, I'm Erika Smiley, and I'm one of the lead educators here at Medicare School. And in this video, we're going to talk about 3 mistakes you don't want to make if you're going to keep working past age 65. We'll talk about the SEP, the special enrollment period that you'll use after age 65 when you are ready to retire. And we'll also talk about the time periods, enrollment periods, and how to of all of this to make sure you avoid any kind of penalties or late fees. So we get the phone calls all the time. Hey, I'm turning 65, but I want to keep working. Do I have to enroll in Medicare? And the answer is no, not if you're covered by an employer or a group plan with a large employer of over 20 employees or more. So it has to be a large employer. That means they have 20 employees or more on the payroll. But if you're covered by a large employer's group plan or you're under your spouse's group employer plan, then you're fine and you don't have to enroll in Medicare. Now, it is important to know if you're taking Social Security already before age 65, you are automatically going to be enrolled in Medicare. They're going to send you your red, white, and blue Medicare card about 100 days or 3.5 months out from your 65th birthday. So the first thing that you need to know, a little tip, if you're going to keep working, when you get that card in the mail, they're automatically going to enroll you in Part A, which is the hospital inpatient coverage, and they're going to enroll you in Part B, which is the outpatient, doctors, more medical visits, outpatient coverage. Now here's the thing, you have to have Part A if you're going to take Social Security. So you can keep Part A, but there's a way you can take that card and flip it over, and on the back there's a place you can say, I want to decline Part B, I don't want to get the medical insurance. And you just sign that, they give you a self-addressed envelope, you can send that card back, and then you can keep working. They'll send you a new card in the mail that is Part A only. So just know, if you want to keep working past 65 and you're on Social Security, they are going to automatically enroll you. You're going to get that card in the mail, just flip it over, sign the back saying you want to decline Part B, mail it back in, and you'll be good to go. But in this video, we're going to talk about those of you who are not currently taking Social Security. You're 65 years old and you want to keep working for a large employer. We want to make sure you know the 3 big mistakes to avoid if you're going to keep working past age 65. All right, so mistake number 1 that you could make if you continue to work past age 65 is thinking because you have an employer plan that you have to stick with it. You don't necessarily have to keep your employer plan if Medicare could be a better option for you. Some people pay a lot of money for their employer plans, and maybe it's lousy coverage. It's not so hot coverage, right? So even though you don't have to go into Medicare because you have an employer plan that's available to you, that doesn't mean you have to keep it. So I encourage you to definitely compare Medicare compared to your employer plan and see which of these is going to be better coverage for me, which is going to make more financial sense. So let's talk about how we can compare the Medicare plans to the employer plans. So one of the things we do here as guides at Medicare School is to talk to people about their individual situation and kind of walk them through the comparison of, okay, you could go on Medicare now, you're turning 65, but you have this employer plan, so which one's going to be the best option for you? So when you're comparing, here's a couple things to consider. So first of all, what's the premium? What do you pay for that work plan? I talk to people sometimes and they're like, I have fantastic coverage and I pay $80 a month for it. That's great, right? Stay with your employer plan. You don't need to go on Medicare if you have a great coverage from work and it's $80 a month. But then I talk to other people and they're like, I pay $400 a month and I really have a lot of out-of-pocket cost, so it's not the best plan, right? So you want to look also at your monthly premium. What do you pay monthly just to have that coverage? And then what are your co-pays? So when you go to the doctor, is it $10 or is it $40? You know, what do your co-pays look like for that plan? What's your co-insurance? So co-insurance meaning maybe your plan pays 80%, but you have to pay 20%. Sometimes the plan will pay 90% and you pay 10%. So that's a good way to look at, kind of what are they covering versus what's out of your pocket. The other one is the deductible. So the deductible means the amount you have to hit before they even start to pay anything. Some employer plans might be $1,500 deductible, okay, or higher. So those are some of the financials you can look at, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of what these look like with Medicare plans, but this is what you want to compare. How does this look with Medicare versus the employer plan that I have right now? Now the big one that kind of falls in with these others, but I think it's really important, is the max out of pocket, okay? So max out of pocket is like worst case scenario, you maxed out your insurance, you fall and break a leg, you're in the hospital, you have, a lot of tests or things that happen to you that year. What's your max out of pocket going to be? What's the most worst case scenario you would have to pay on your employer plan versus with Medicare, okay? And now another thing to think about outside of the financials of it are, do you have a spouse and dependents on your plan? So obviously going into Medicare is not going to be an option for you if you've got a wife and a 25-year-old on your plan, right? Or if you've got dependents or you have a spouse, because you're going to have to still be on that employer plan for them to have coverage. So you wouldn't want to go into Medicare and lose coverage for your spouse or any dependents. And then the last one, a lot of people may not know or they may not think of, is what medications are you on? So there's a lot of very expensive medications out there. And if you're on an employer plan and you're on one of these very expensive medications, you could be paying thousands and thousands of dollars a year. Some people are on medications that cost thousands of dollars a month. And with Medicare, a lot of people don't know, there is a $2,000 cap. So that's in 2025. We're hearing rumors in 2026 that it's going to go up to $2,100. Okay, so I think that's going up to $2,100 in 2026. But that's a cap. That's the most you will pay for medications if you're on a Medicare plan. So obviously, if you're on some medication that's $3,000 or $4,000 a month, if you go with Medicare, you're going to pay $2,100 this year. You're going to pay $2,000 for that medication, and then everything else would be covered the rest of the year. So that might be something to look at if you're on pricier medications and you're on an employer plan. Medicare might be a better option. So let's look at an example of some comparisons between looking at an employer plan and some of your Medicare options. Okay, so first of all, I have here 3 columns. So we have the employer plan. That's the employer plan, okay? In the middle, we have a Medicare plus a supplemental plan. So these supplemental plans are either G's or N's, okay? If you don't know what that is, again, we have a lot of videos on supplemental plans, the G plan versus the N plan. But for this example, we're gonna go with the most comprehensive, which is the G plan. Okay. Now, if you're anywhere near the age 65, you've probably definitely heard of Medicare Advantage plans, because there's a lot of people who call you and send you stuff in the mail and start to kind of bombard you about these Advantage plans. But that's another option you can go as well, the Medicare Advantage plans. And it's very differently how these two systems work, Medicare plus a supplement or Medicare Advantage plans. So we'll kind of compare and look at all 3, okay? So let's say for your employer plan, right now you're paying $300 a month to have your employer plan, okay? Now what does it cost to just have basic Medicare? Well, for most of you who are been working for 40 quarters, which is 10 years. So if you've worked for 10 years or more and paid into the system, you're gonna get Part A for $0, okay? So it's premium free, no premium for Part A for about 99% of you who have worked for 10 years or more, your 40 quarters, or you can also get that from a spouse if you have a spouse who has worked for 40 quarters, okay? Now Part B, the base price for that this year is $185. So the average American's going to pay about $185 to have Medicare Part B. Okay. Now there is something called an IRMA. So if you have a high income and you make over a certain amount, there's something called an IRMA, which is an income-related monthly adjusted amount. And again, we have a lot of videos on IRMAs, you can look that up, but that just means you've made a lot of money, so they're gonna charge you more than that base price of $185 for your Medicare Part B, okay? So in 2025, what they would do is look back at your modified adjusted income from 2 years ago. So they're gonna look at 2023, and your modified adjusted gross income is lines 11 plus line 2A on your tax return, okay? And what they're gonna say is, if you're a single filer and you made over $106,000, you're gonna have an IRMA. If you're married and you filed jointly, your taxes jointly, and you made over $212,000, you're going to have an IRMA, right? And those IRMAs are in different brackets depending on what you made. Again, go check out the IRMA chart. It's IRMAA. And see where you fall, because that's going to make a big difference. If you're paying $185 for Part B versus like $400 for Part B because you made a lot of money, you want to make sure you know that, okay? So you have to have Medicare A and B, and for an Advantage plan, you have to also have Medicare Part A and B. So we're going to put on here you have to have Part A and B, and again, we're going to pay $185 for that, okay? Now, another thing to look at is what you pay out of pocket on top of the monthly premium, okay? So I'm just gonna put, for this case, the max out of pocket on an employer plan, okay? So most employer plans, I don't know, I'm gonna say that a lot of employer plans, the max out of pocket could be anywhere from $3K up to like $8K, okay? So I'm gonna put $5,000 is the average max out of pocket for an employer plan, okay? Now, what is your max out of pocket if we're going with Medicare and a supplemental plan, like a Plan G? Well, actually, you pay your monthly premium for the G plan, okay? So anywhere in the country, depending on where you live, it determines what state you live in. It can be different if you're male or female or your age, but the average price for a G plan is anywhere from $150 to $180-ish, okay? So for this case, we'll go on the lower side, we'll say $150. Again, you'd want to call one of our guides and talk to them to help you compare, because if you're in a state like maybe Florida, somewhere on the East Coast or on the West Coast, it could be more. It could be upwards of $200 a month for that G plan, okay? So just know that if you went the route of Medicare and a supplemental, you'd be paying $185 a month plus $150. So you'd be looking at $335 a month just to have Medicare under that situation with the G plan. Now let's look at the Advantage plans. So what do the Advantage plans cost every month? Well, most of them don't cost you anything. Some of them might be very low, like $10 a month or $20 a month, but most of the Advantage plans are $0 to have them. Now, you do have a lot more out of pocket. We'll look at that in a minute. But as far as a monthly premium, $0. So to have a Medicare Advantage plan, you're looking at around $185 a month as far as what you're going to pay monthly, okay? All right, so there's other things to consider with these Medicare plans. You have to pay a little bit of out of pocket. So right here on the G plan, the only other thing you pay besides your Part B premium every month and what you're paying for your G plan, you have to pay a deductible, a one-time of $257, okay? So $257 is what you would pay. On top of that, so that's just something to keep in mind. That would be your max out of pocket, though, really, with that G plan, because once you meet that $257, it's going to cover everything after that, okay? Now, with the Advantage plans, those are very similar to employer plans. You're going to have co-pays, you're going to have co-insurance, you're going to probably have a deductible, and you're definitely going to have a max out of pocket. Now, depending if you go with an HMO or a PPO or an HMO POS, which is kind of combination of the both, depends on your max out of pocket. But really, the max out of pockets on these can be anywhere from $3K up to $10K. Okay, so they can be kind of higher. Again, you don't pay anything for the Advantage plan, but you do pay as you go. So when you're in the hospital, when you need an MRI, when you need an X-ray and that care, you pay as you go, okay? Hey, if you found this video helpful, do us a favor. Go give us a like. We always appreciate it. And subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those future videos. And leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We love to answer any questions you have. That's what it's here for. So drop us a comment below. So let's compare for a year, a calendar year, if you max out these plans, what the price would kind of look like. What are we comparing here? So again, we looked at the employer plan. It's about $300 a month was your premium. Your max out of pocket was about $5,000, right? So we're looking at about $3,600 a year in premium. That's what you're paying just to have your work plan, $3,600 out of your paychecks, right? And then your max out of pocket, if you max that plan out, is going to be $5,000. Now that doesn't include what you pay just to have the plan. That's actually in medical bills, okay? So you'd be looking on this plan, you could have a total of about $8,600 you're spending on this employer plan. Now, the other thing is an employer plan is usually a PPO or an HMO. You have to worry about networks. Is your doctor you're seeing in or out of network? You have to deal with some things like prior authorizations. I've told you in other videos, I'm about to get a knee surgery and I'm going through red tape right now with prior authorizations and trying to get it approved. So those are some things to consider as well when you're looking at your employer plan. Now let's look at the middle option here, which again, remember is Medicare, original Medicare, plus a supplemental plan like a G plan or an N plan. We're using G for this example. Okay, so we added up that you have to pay your $185 for your Part B. G plan's around $150. That could be more depending on where you live. But for this example, we're saying it's about $335 a month to have Medicare plus that G plan. Okay, so we threw in the only thing you have to pay out of pocket on top of this really is the $257 Part B deductible. And once you've met that, everything else is covered. So we're looking at, for that monthly premium to have Medicare in the G plan, in this scenario, we'd be paying about $4,020 just to have our monthly coverage. Then you add in that $257, that Part B deductible you have to pay. So it's right around $4,277, about just under $4,300 to have original Medicare plus that G plan if you got it for a rate of about $150, okay? So obviously you would talk to our guides and figure out what your G plan rate would be. Maybe you go with an N plan, which is a little bit less. Those come in anywhere from like $90 to $150, depending on where you are. But for the most part, the only other thing you need on top of this would be a drug plan, a Part D drug plan. I write those a lot for people if they're not on many medications or they're generic medications. A lot of times they have a $0 plan in their area where it doesn't cost them anything else for their Part D drug coverage. But in this scenario, I just use the average national rate right now for a drug plan, which is around $36. So that would cost you, in addition, about another $432-ish a year. So after all that math, and it's a lot of math, I know, that's why we say call a guide and let's talk through it. But you'd be looking at about a little over $4,700 if you went with original Medicare and a supplemental plan, if you got it for that $150 rate right there, okay? So already we're looking at, hey, that looks pretty good. My max on my employer plan was like $8,600. The max if I had original Medicare and a G plan would be closer to like $4,700, okay? Now another thing to consider, original Medicare, this system, you can see any doctor in the country. So you can go to any doctor that accepts Medicare, which is about 98% of doctors accept Medicare. So a lot of freedom and flexibility with that if you travel. And then also, you don't have to worry as much about things like referrals. You can just go to the orthopedic doctor, go to the cardiologist if you need it. You don't have to worry about those prior authorizations. If your doctor says you need the knee surgery, you're going to get it, and the insurance company's not going to have any say in it, okay? Medicare is going to approve that, and whatever Medicare pays, your supplemental plan has to pay as well. Okay, so let's say you go the Medicare Advantage route. So let's compare, maybe you want to look at your employer plan versus an Advantage plan. What would that look like? So we've already said to have the Advantage plan, you have to pay for your Part B, your Part A and Part B, which is probably going to cost you around $185 a month. The Advantage plans usually have no premium. They're $0 a month. So that means you're going to pay about $2,220 just to have Medicare for 12 months and that Advantage plan. But remember, we talked about there's a lot of out-of-pocket costs as you go through the year and as you need medical services, as you see the doctor, as you're hospitalized, okay? There's co-pays, there's deductibles and all that. So again, we talked about if it's an HMO or a PPO, those max out-of-pockets can range from $3,000 upwards of $10,000. So I took a number kind of right there in the middle and I said $5,000, okay? So that's kind of comparing apples to apples with the employer plan, max out-of-pockets $5,000. Let's say your Advantage plan, max out-of-pockets $5,000. That would bring you in with your Part B premium you have to pay and your max out-of-pocket around $7,200 for the year to have a Medicare Advantage plan, okay? So these are the kind of things you want to work through and look at when you're comparing an employer plan to Medicare, okay? And of course, when you talk about Medicare, there's two options. Do you want to go original Medicare with a supplement, or do you want to go with the Advantage plan, okay? Now, the Advantage plans, keep in mind, you have networks, and you have to get referrals for a lot of these, especially if you're with an HMO, and there's going to be prior authorizations. So if it comes to flexibility and freedom, The Advantage plan is going to be pretty similar to an employer plan. These are also annual calendar year plans, so they change yearly. Doctors can come and go out of those plans. The formularies can change, so you need to kind of look at those and change them yearly. Where the supplemental plans, they're kind of set it and forget it, okay? And these are local plans. So if you're on vacation, you live in Boston and you go down to Florida as a snowbird, unless it's an emergency, something's probably not going to be covered because you're not in your network, right? So these are more local plans, okay? So just the comparisons. And again, just because you're turning 65 and you're going to continue to work and you have that employer plan available, that doesn't mean it's the best option for you. So we do encourage you to give us a call and compare your employer plan to Medicare and see which is going to be more freedom, more flexibility, better, more comprehensive coverage, and a better financial option for you. Mistake number 2 that you don't want to make if you're going to be working past age 65 and not taking Medicare is that you want to have no gaps in coverage. So what's going to happen is if you continue to work for a large employer and you stay on your employer group plan and you work till you're like maybe 68, 69 years old, when you are ready to retire and come into Medicare, you're going to have what's called a SEP. So this is your special enrollment period, and this is what they're giving you. It's your window, it's your time to come into Medicare after age 65, okay? Now this SEP, this is an 8-month period. So you have 8 months from the time of when you lose your employer coverage to enroll in Medicare. Now, you absolutely would not want to go that long, right? You don't want to have no coverage for 8 months. So even though they give you an 8-month window where you won't get penalties or anything like that, you would want to make sure you line this up. When you are ready to retire, you want to start Medicare the next month, okay? So in your SEP, let's say you are going to retire in June, okay? Tell your boss, June's my last month. I'm going to be out of here the last day of June. Your coverage for work would probably last through the last day of June, and then you would want to make sure you line up your Medicare to start July 1st, okay? So pretty much when you go to retire, you're going to have this thing called a SEP, a special enrollment period, and there's a couple forms they make you fill out. And one of these forms is called a L564. And the main purpose of this form is to prove that you have had no gaps in coverage back to the age of 65. Okay? So they want you to prove and show that you have been covered by either an employer group plan or your spouse's employer group plan back to age 65. And on this form, L564, if you work with us, we'll help fill it out for you, but you actually take it to your employer and they're going to sign it to show proof of coverage. Now, where you can make a mistake here and where you need to be very careful is if you have a gap in your coverage, even a month where you were not covered, you're going to lose your privilege to an SEP. And that could block you from being able to enroll until the next open enrollment period, which starts January 1st, okay? That could leave you without coverage. It could also mean that you're going to end up with some penalties and late fees, and we don't want that to happen. So here's what you need to make sure of. If you're 65, you want to keep working, that's cool. Stay on your employer plan, that's great. But for if some reason, let's say you're 66 years old and your company downsizes and you take an early retirement, you need to get on Medicare right away, okay? Let's say maybe you just leave that employer, but you're gonna go look for another job. Maybe there's 2 or 3 months where you're in between jobs. You need to enroll in Medicare Part B right away because we need to make sure you have coverage every month. Because again, if you have gaps in your coverage back to age 65, that could mess up your special enrollment period. So the third mistake you could make if you're gonna continue to work past age 65 could be to enroll in Part A if you have and are contributing to an HSA account. So an HSA account is a health savings account, and it's a wonderful account where you can have pre-tax dollars that go in there. It's money for medical expenses. I think you can take it out tax-free, and they're awesome, right? So if you have that, you don't want to enroll in Part A. Now, why not? Because if you enroll in Part A, you are no longer allowed to contribute money to that HSA account, okay? You could have tax penalties. You'd have to pay back taxes on that if you do. They're no longer going to let you contribute to the account. Now, of course, the money that's in there is your money and you have access to it, but no more further contributions can be made if you enroll in Part A. Okay. Now just know if you're taking Social Security, they're going to make you enroll in Part A. So there's that to think about. But if you're just working, some people, if they do not have an HSA, we'll tell them, yeah, go ahead and enroll in Part A only. Remember, Part A is your hospitalization coverage. And if you've worked for 40 quarters, which is 10 years, then you get Part A premium free. So if you do not have an HSA, yeah, go ahead, we tell people, and enroll in Part A. It may pay second to your employer plan. If you're in the hospital, it may cover some of that. It won't pay deductibles or copays, but it will pay some co-insurance possibly. So you could get some coverage as Part A as a secondary payer to your employer plan. But very important, only do that if you do not have an HSA. If you have an HSA, you want to say no thank you to Part A because you want to keep being able to put money into that health savings account. So just to recap those 3 mistakes you don't want to make if you're working past age 65. The first one is don't forget to compare. Look at that employer plan next to your Medicare options and see which one's going to give you more comprehensive coverage and make more financial sense. And again, our guides are happy to walk you through that and help you look at those plans and your different options. Number 2 mistake you don't want to make, again, is no gaps in coverage back to age 65. So remember, if you're going to continue to work, you must always be covered by a group or employer plan through yourself or your spouse, or you need to get on Medicare Part B. Okay? And the third mistake we want to stay away from is, remember, say no to Part A if you're contributing money to an HSA. Okay? Now, again, it's awesome. Keep working. Enjoy that. And then when you're ready to retire, give us a call because there are some forms you're going to need. So again, we've got the L564 that we talked about, and there's also something called the CMS 40B, and that's a form that you're going to fill out to tell Medicare when you'd like to start coverage. So again, we're happy to kind of walk you through this, let you know, should you go with Medicare or should you stick with your employer plan after age 65, and we can help you with the enrollment process when you are finally ready to retire.